Dear students, welcome to the last video of today's class. Now in this video, we are going to discuss independent samples t-test. So this is the last type of t-test that we are going to discuss. And we are going to use the same questionnaire just as before. So let's go down. Now as you can see here, we have already done one sample t-test. Then we have also done in the last video paired sample t-test. Now we are going to finish off the video with independent samples t-test. So this one. So when do we use it? Please listen to me very carefully. Once you get to understand when to use independent samples t-test, then the rest of the task is really easy. So let's start. An independent samples t-test is used when you want to compare the mean score on some continuous variable for two different groups of participants. This is the main part. For two different groups of participants. So again, we are going to compare the same mean as before. So we are again going to compare the average, but this time the average belongs to two different groups of people or two different groups of participants. Now let me make it even clearer to you. Remember in the paired sample t-test, we compared data that was collected from the same person twice. We collected weight data from a person before the 3-month exercise program, and then after 3 months exercise, we again collected the weight data from that same person. And then we compared those two means. But here in independent samples t-test, we compare data collected from two different groups of participants. Let me move on to the example. In that way, it will be much clearer to you. Let's move on to the first example. Is there any difference between the mean height of male and female? See, I'm comparing the mean or average height of two different groups of people. In one group, we have all the males, and in the other group, we have all the females. So again, we are going to compare average between two different groups of people, male and female. Let me explain it to you even further. Let's go back to our questionnaire or the responses that we have collected here. So here we have males and females both. So we have collected 15 forms from 15 different respondents. But among these 15 respondents, we have both male and female, right? Now, after data collection, if we want to find out that whether there is any height difference between the average height of all the males and the average height of all the females, in that case, we will have to use independent samples t-test. Now, I guess the definition is crystal clear to you. So let's go back. Yes. So is there any difference between the mean height of male and female? Now let me move on to the other example. Is there any difference between the mean weight of the Americans and the Japanese? See, here again, we are going to compare the mean or average weight between two different groups of people. On the one hand, we have Americans, and on the other hand, we have Japanese. So again, if in our sample, we have people from different nationalities, and then we want to compare the average weight between Americans and Japanese, in that case, we will have to test independent samples t-test again. Now, before I move on further, can you make a guess? Why is it called independent samples t-test? Yes, because the groups that we are going to compare are independent of each other. Again, the groups that we are going to compare are independent of each other. So here, in the first question, the males and females, they are independent of each other. I mean, the height of male does not depend on the height of female, right? Similarly, the weight of Americans and the weight of Japanese are independent of each other. It's not that like the weight of one nationality depends on the weight of the other nationality. So as we are comparing the average weight between two independent groups, that's why it is called independent samples t-test. Now I guess the definition is crystal clear to you. Now, let's move on to the hypothesis for these types of questions. Again, the good news is the null and alternate hypothesis are exactly the same as it was before. So here, in null hypothesis, it will be there is no statistically significant difference between the two means. And similarly, in the alternate hypothesis, we'll have there is a statistically significant difference between the two means. So it is exactly the same as it was before. Now let's move on to a question and try to solve it using SPSS. Is there any statistically significant difference between the mean height of male and female? So let's try to find out this information based on the data that we have collected using SPSS. So let's go back to SPSS. So here we have the data view. Now for independent samples t-test, we have to go to analyze. Then we have to select compare means. And finally, we have to select independent samples t-test. Again, analyze first, then compare means, and then move on to independent samples t-test. So let's select this option. Now again, a similar table just as before appears. On the left hand side, we have all the variables or the questions, and on the right hand side, we have to bring in all the variables that we want to use for our question. Now, just as before, I am going to right click here, and then I'm going to select display variable names. So here I have all the variables listed. Now, can you guess which variable are we going to use for this question? As the question suggested, we have to compare the height. So we have to select the height variable and then select this. So the height variable is shifted to the right. Now we are not done yet. Just below this box, we can see another box, which is grouping variable. This is something new for independent samples t-test. What we have to do here? We have to select another variable. Which one? Let me go back to the question before I explain this. Read the question first. Is there any statistically significant difference between the mean height of male and female? So here we are going to measure the height variable. But based on what variable we have created these two groups? Again, based on what variable we have created these two groups, male and female? Yes, you guessed it right. This classification or this grouping came from the gender variable, because both male and female are different classifications of the gender variable, right? So in the grouping variable here, we have to select gender. So let's go back, and here we have to select the gender variable. Why again? Because based on the gender variable, we have created two different groups in that question, male and female. So let's go back to the left hand side and select the gender variable, and then select this icon. See, the gender variable is here. Now, what is the next step? We are not done yet. I'm sorry, we are not done yet. So we have one last thing to do. If you take a look carefully, we have gender written here. But beside that, in first bracket, we have two question marks. So SPSS is asking here that yes, you have used the gender variable for creating your two different groups. But what are those two different groups? Again, based on the gender variable, you have compared the average height of two different groups. But SPSS is asking, what are those two different groups? Now, before I give you the answer, my question is, why is it asking so? Why does SPSS need to know that? Now, before I answer this, let's go back to the questionnaire again. So let's go up. Now here, if we take a look, under gender variable, we had three options: male, female, and other. Now we have already instructed SPSS that yes, we are going to use gender as our grouping variable. But now we need to tell SPSS that yes, among these three options, which two groups are we going to compare? Again, among these three options, male, female, and other, which two groups exactly are we going to compare? Now from the question you already know, the answer is male and female. We are going to do the comparison between male and female group. So what was the coding for those two groups? For male, we coded in SPSS with 1, and for female, we coded in SPSS with 2. So male with 1 and female with 2. So let's go back to SPSS. Now here, in order to select male and female in these two question marks, we have to click here, define groups. So select this option. Now we have to tell SPSS which one is group 1 for me and which one is group 2 for me. Now if you remember, one of the groups that we selected for comparison was male. So for male, we used the code 1, and for female, we used the code 2. Again, in variable view, we coded male with 1 and we coded female with 2. So we have to type the two codes here, and that's what we did. Now select continue. So yes, we are done. So what have we done till now? First of all, we selected the height variable and shifted it to the right. Why? Because this is the variable for which we are going to compare the means or the averages. Next, in the grouping variable, we brought in gender. Why? Because based on gender variable, we have selected two groups between which we are going to do the comparison. And then finally, once we have selected gender as our grouping variable, we have specified in SPSS that yes, from the gender variable, we are going to do the comparison between male and female. So code 1 and code 2. That is it. So we are done. Now if we select OK, our result will appear. So let's do that now. Let's select OK. So yes, our result is ready and it's here. Now let's start analyzing the results. Again, just as before, we have to look for two specific values. Number one, we have to take a look at the specific mean values of these two groups of people. So if we take a look at the first table, here we have two rows. In the first row, we have 1, which was coded for male, and here we have the mean value for males, which is 141 centimeters. And in the next row, we have 2, which was coded for female, and the mean height for the females are 166 centimeters. So yes, we have already found out the means. So we have got the values here. Now besides this, we have another task remaining. We have to find out the p-value or the statistical significance of this result. Where do we find out the p-value? It's given in the second table. But which one? Please take note very carefully. It's given in this column here. Again, this column. But here is a problem. As you can see here, we have two different values in two different rows. So in this column, in the first row, we have 0.009 and we have another p-value which is 0.030. So unlike the earlier results, we have two p-values here. Now which one do we consider? Is it the first one or is it the second one? Here is a very important detail, and this is very crucial and at the same time a little bit difficult to understand. Don't worry, even then I'm going to explain the whole process within the next 5 minutes. So you have to pay attention very closely. Alright? So let me start. Now as I said, here I have two values given. One p-value at the top and the other one just below it. But we have to use only one of them and eliminate the other. Now there is a specific rule to follow in case of deciding which one of these p-values we have to eliminate. And for this decision, we have to come here. Lovin's test for equality of variances. Again, Lovin's test for equality of variances, and we have to look more specifically to this cell, significance, which is written 0.265. Now let me explain this whole Lovin's test for equality of variances in detail. Now for that, I have to go back to the questionnaire, alright? But before I do that, I just want to mention something here. For independent samples t-test, in order to decide which p-value among these two we are going to use for our purpose, we have to run two different sets of hypothesis tests. Again, we have to run two different sets of hypothesis tests. One is the t-test for equality of means as it is written here, and the other one is Lovin's test for equality of variances. Again, Lovin's test for equality of variances. So I'm going to explain both of these tests one by one now. Alright? So let's go back to the questionnaire. So we are back and now let's go down. Yes, we are here. So read this portion very carefully. For independent samples t-test, we have to run two different sets of hypotheses. So the first thing we have to do is we have to run Lovin's test for equality of variances. So this is another hypothesis test. What do we do here? Through this test, we identify whether the variance or variation of scores for the two groups, which are male and female, is the same. Again, through this test, we identify whether the variance or variation of the scores of these two groups, male and female, is the same. Let me explain it thoroughly. What do we mean by the term variance here? In your statistics course, you were taught the term variance. Remember there was something called standard deviation and variance? Yes, you are supposed to learn that topic in your statistics course, and it is a very easy topic. So by variance, we mean how much the different values in my sample varies. Again, how much the different values in my sample vary. Now don't worry, I'm going to explain it in further detail. I'm going to go to a whiteboard very soon to explain this concept. Now before that, let me go through this line once again. Here it is written, through this test we are going to measure whether the variance of the scores from the two groups, male and female, is the same. So remember this line and then let's go back to the whiteboard. I'm going to explain it to you thoroughly now. Now let's take a look, what do we mean by variance? So yes, this is the term. So as I said, variance means how much my data varies. Now for the question given, remember we are trying to compare the height of male and female. Now let's assume on the left hand side we have male and on the right hand side we have female. Now take a look at this very carefully. On the left hand side under male, I'm going to write down 6 height values of 6 different males. So let's start. The height of the first person is 160. The height of the second person is 200. The height of the third person is 300. The height of the fourth person is 100. The height of the fifth person is 50. And the height of the sixth person is 1000. So these are the heights of 6 different people. Now let's move on to the right hand side. Now I'm going to write down 6 height values of 6 different females. So let's start. Let's assume the height of the first female is 200. The height of the second female is 210. The height of the third female is 220. The height of the fourth is 200 again. The height of the fifth is 190. And the last height is 180. So yes, these are all the different heights of 6 different males and 6 different heights of 6 different females. Now, by looking at these figures, can you answer a question? Do the figures of male height vary much more than the figures of female height? Again, do the figures of male height vary much more than the figures of female height? Yes, definitely. If we look at the male values, the heights vary significantly. We have 160, then 200, then suddenly 100, and then again suddenly 1000. So they vary a lot. On the other hand, if we look at the female height figures, they do not vary that much. Yes, they do vary, but much less. So from here, we can easily say that the variance of the male height figures is much higher than the variance of the female height figures. Again, the variance of the male height figures is much higher or much more than the female height figures. So from here, we can write one thing very easily. What is that? Here it is. Variance of male height is not equal to variance of female height. Right? So yes, we can write variance of male height is not equal to variance of female height. Why? Because the variance in the case of male is much higher. It varies a lot. So by now, I guess the concept of variance is crystal clear to you. Now let's go back to the questionnaire once again. So now that we understand what we mean by variance and what we mean by equality of variances, we can move on to the hypothesis for this test very easily. So what we do in this test? Let's carry on with the definition once again. So the Levene's test for equality of variances tests whether the variance of score for the two groups, males and females, is the same or different. So the outcome of this test determines which of the t-values that IBM Spaces provides is the correct one for you to use. So we are going to ignore this line for this moment, but this is very crucial. Don't worry, you will understand it very easily very soon. Let's move on to the hypothesis first. So again, Levene's test is a hypothesis test. And through this hypothesis, we are going to find out whether there is a difference between the two variances. Again, we are going to find out whether there is any difference between the variance of male and the variance of female. So what will be the null hypothesis for this test? Again, just as before, there is no statistically significant difference between the variance. That is the only difference here. If we take a look at the earlier hypothesis was about there is no statistically significant difference between the two means. So earlier, we wrote hypothesis about the difference between means. But in Levene's test for equality of variances, we try to find out whether there is any statistically significant difference between the variance. Why? Because the test is named as such. Levene's test for equality of variances. So again, the null hypothesis is there is no statistically significant difference between the variance. And then what is the alternate hypothesis? There is a statistically significant difference between the variance. Oh, sorry, I have to write the here. So I'm doing it right now. So yes, done. So there is a statistically significant difference between the variance. So yes, this is the simple hypothesis that we are going to test through Lovin's test for equality of variances. So this is the first test that we are going to run. And based on the result of this test, we are going to run the second test. So now, before I go back to SPSS, once again, the null hypothesis is there is no statistically significant difference. On the other hand, alternate hypothesis is there is a statistically significant difference between the variance. Now let's go back to SPSS. So as I said earlier, Lovin's test for equality of variance is given here. Now, if you have understood why do we use this test, then understanding the result is really easy. It will take just 30 seconds. The only thing that we need to take a look at for this test is the p-value. Again, the only thing that we need to take a look at for this test is the p-value. Where is the p-value given? Exactly here, under significance column. So what is the p-value? 0.265. Now, is it below 5% or above 5%? Definitely it's above 5% because it is 0.265 or 26.5%. That's a lot. So this p-value for Lovin's test for equality of variances is above 5%. So the p-value is greater than 5%. So now what do? Do we reject the null hypothesis or accept the null hypothesis? The mechanism is exactly the same as before. If the p-value is greater than 5%, then there is no statistically significant difference. Again, if the result is greater than 5%, there is no statistically significant difference. So the rule is same as before. So let's go back to the questionnaire and then take a look at the null and alternate hypothesis again. So we have just found out that the p-value is greater than 5%. So again, as the p-value is greater than 5%, so there is no statistically significant difference, right? So do we accept the null hypothesis or reject the null hypothesis? Yes, we accept the null hypothesis. Why? Because the null hypothesis says there is no statistically significant difference between the variance. And that is what exactly our result has found out. So again, our result says there is no statistically significant difference between the variance of male and female height. So one of the tests is done. And what is the output of this test? There is no difference between the variances. That means both the variances are equal. Again, both the variances are equal. So what do we do next? Let's go back to SPSS. So we have already found out based on this result that both the variances are equal. Now if we take a look here, we have two options. Equal variances assumed and the second option says equal variances not assumed. What do we mean by this? That means all the entries in the first row assumes that there is equal variance between the height of male and female. Again, there is equal variance between the height of male and female. And in the second row, all the data entry assumes that there is no equal variance between the height of male and female. So the height of male and female variance is different. So again, the first row assumes that the variances are equal. And the second row assumes that the variances are not equal. They are different. Now, which one of these two rows do we use? I guess by now many of you have already understood. As our Lovin's test of equality of variances have found out that there is no difference between the two variances. So we are going to assume that there is equal variance. And as a result, we are going to consider all the results of this row only. And we are going to ignore or eliminate all the entries in this row. Why? Because our Lovin's test result said so. It found out that yes, the variances are equal in this case. So we have to consider all the data or result of this row only. So now, from these two cells, we have two p-values. Now we have decided that yes, we can consider this p-value only and we can ignore or eliminate this p-value. Why? Because we have just decided that this row is eliminated. So we have to consider this value only. Alright, now that we have decided that yes, we have to consider this value, now let's start the second hypothesis test. We have just finished the Lovin's test for equality of variances. Now we have to start t-test for equality of means. And this is very easy. It's really simple and you have done that already. What is that? Let's go back. It is the actual test that we have to run. So the second test is t-test for equality of means. So this is the actual test for independent samples t-test. Again, this is the actual test that we started with, and this is the actual thing or the actual difference that we are looking for. So the null hypothesis for this test is there is no statistically significant difference between the two means, and the alternate hypothesis is there is a statistically significant difference between the two means. So this is the actual hypothesis that we started with, because ultimately the question asked us to find out whether the mean heights of male and female are different. So this is the main hypothesis. So let's go back and take a look at this p-value. This p-value belongs to t-test for equality of means, or our main hypothesis test. Now if we take a look at this p-value, is it greater than 5% or less than 5%? Yes, this is less than 5%. So here p-value is less than 5%. So based on this result, we can say that yes, there is a statistically significant difference between the average height of male and female. Again, as the p-value is less than 5%, we can easily say that yes, there is a statistically significant difference between the average height of male and female. So let's go back. Now, let's decide based on the result that we have got, do we accept the null hypothesis or do we accept the alternate hypothesis? Yes, you are correct. Based on the result, we found out that there is a statistically significant difference, so we have to reject the null. Why? Because the alternate hypothesis says that there is a statistically significant difference between the two means. So we accept the alternate hypothesis. So yes, we are finally done. I know this is very difficult to understand and it's really critical. Why? Because rather than running one hypothesis test, we had to run two separate hypothesis tests here. That's why it's difficult. Now let me summarize the result one more time. Let's go back. So in SPSS, we ran a hypothesis test to find out whether the average height of male and female is different. In the first table, we found out that the male average height is 141 and the female average height is 166. So these are the values. Now for p-value for this test, we have to run two separate tests. One is Levene's test for equality of variances and the other one is t-test for equality of means. Why do we have to do it? Because in the p-value column, we have two values. Now we have to eliminate one of these values and consider only one of them. And in order to find out which value to use exactly, we have to run this test, Levene's test for equality of variances. Now under Levene's test for equality of variances, for this hypothesis test, we find out that the p-value is 0.265, which is much higher than 5%. And we know when the p-value is greater than 5%, we can say that there is no difference between the variances. And when we say there is no difference between the two variances, that means both the variances are equal. So we can say that equal variances are assumed. So based on the result, we can say that yes, we have to consider all the values in this row only, and we have to reject all the values in the second row. So now we can easily say that yes, between these two p-values, we can reject the one below, and we have to consider the one in the first row. Now once we have found out that yes, we have to consider this one, now we have to apply the rule of p-value again. So we have to find out whether this p-value is less than 5% or greater than 5%. We can easily see that this is less than 5%. So as it is less than 5%, we can say that there is a significant difference between the two means, because that is the rule. Whenever the p-value is less than 5%, we can say that there is a statistically significant difference between the two means. So based on this result, if we go back to the questionnaire, we can say that yes, we have to accept the alternate hypothesis. So based on our analysis, we can finally answer this question. Is there any statistically significant difference between the mean height of male and female? We can proudly say that yes, there is a statistically significant difference between the mean height of male and female. So yes, we are done with independent samples t-test. I know this is a very difficult concept. If you have any questions, please meet me during consultation hours. But to make it easier for you and make it easily understandable for you, I would suggest one thing. Try to understand this example and do it on your own again. And after that, I'm going to give you another thorough example of independent samples t-test. So thank you for listening to this lecture. That's all for today. See you in the next class.